Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, this is Impression Blend, and I know many of you are just like me watching as many horror films as you possibly can right now because you are in full-on Halloween mode, discovering new favorites, rewatching old favorites. I see what you're logging on Letterboxd. So I thought now was a good time to maybe add to that watch list, and today I'm going to be talking about some of my personal Halloween and horror favorites, specifically the ones that you can stream online right now. I'm going to be grouping them by streaming service so you know easily where to find them. There are 5 streaming services that I'm going to be covering today, and I'm picking 5 movies per service. Obviously, we are talking about US availability since that's where I am and that's what I see as available to me. So if you're in a different country, I hope most of these at least are still available to you, and if not, just take them as my personal recommendations anyways. Let's get into it. I am starting this off, of course, with Shudder because it is the logical choice for horror movies since this entire streaming platform is dedicated to horror. They have a huge selection, anything from classics and cult favorites to more recent releases and even some Shudder exclusives, and it just so happens that they do have quite a few of my personal favorites. And by the way, this video is not sponsored by Shudder or any other service that I mentioned today. First up, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't talk nearly enough about this horror classic on my channel, probably because I think that it requires no introduction, but I realized that a lot of you may have no idea how much I love this film. This is an iconic slasher classic for a reason. The film is really good and holds up incredibly well, no matter how old it is. It's really impressive, to be honest. The dinner scene is horrifying. It gives me chills every time I watch the movie, but the entire thing is extremely creepy. Also, I find the story behind the production fascinating, so if you have time, look up some documentaries and some information about that. There's a great book written by the actor who played Leatherface. It's very interesting. Highly recommended. Also, A Tale of Two Sisters. I was so happy to see that this one was available on Shudder. It's kind of difficult to find on Blu-ray or DVD. At least I haven't had good luck, but yes, this amazing film from South Korea is on Shudder. I recently talked about it in my 15 movies to get you into horror video. If you missed that one, I will leave a link in the info box below. But this is a stunning psychological horror mystery slash family drama. There's a lot going on in this film, including Ghost. It's an amazing twisted story, a must watch for any horror fan. The next 2 on this list are also from South Korea because in South Korea, they just know how to make really good horror films, apparently. Of course, I am talking about my well-known favorites, The Wailing and Train to Busan. The Wailing, I'm just going to keep recommending until all of you watch this film because I know not all of you have seen it and you need to. It is one of the best supernatural horror films ever made. It is best to go into this blind because it is a really good mystery as well as a horror film. So don't really look anything up other than it is kind of an investigation slash supernatural horror. There are many fascinating twists and turns, and you may have some trouble going to bed after seeing this one because it is genuinely terrifying. At least I found it to be genuinely terrifying, and I don't really scare that easily. I do have a review for this film on my channel, so I will leave a link to that in the info box below, as well as any links to any of the reviews that I've done of the films that I mentioned here. So I'm just going to stop saying that I will leave a link, but yes, the links will be below. Now, Train to Busan, of course, is another one of those horror films I keep recommending every chance I get because it is just that good. I really do think that this is something that even people who are skeptical about horror would enjoy, and I do have a review for this one as well. It is fast-paced, it is entertaining, there is a lot of zombie action going on, which does sound like something that has been done before and what could possibly be interesting about this subgenre, but I am telling you right now, this is one of the best zombie films ever made, and this is coming from someone who doesn't really love the zombie subgenre to begin with. This is definitely an exception, and something that's also fun to rewatch even if you've seen it before. And speaking of subgenres I'm not the biggest fan of, the last one I want to talk about on Shudder is Ginger Snaps. This is a film that I just watched a couple days ago. I thought that I did not like werewolf movies because I thought that all they could possibly be is cheesy. However, this one proved me wrong. I was really surprised by how good this was, especially considering that this movie is from the year 2000, so it is 20 years old, but the practical effects are still looking good for the most part. It was darker than I expected. It had some genuinely disturbing moments. It is a coming-of-age story about two sisters, one of which is turning into a werewolf, and I am definitely going to watch this one again. So if you've been putting this off for as long as I have, and yes, this was my first time watching it, then you should definitely give it a try. So Netflix has been a great destination for horror for months and months, and they had so many of my favorites on there. I mean, they had The Witch, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, The Wailing, Train to Busan. They had The Crow, which is not a horror film, but it is absolutely my yearly Halloween watch, and many, many more. But for some reason, in September and October, they took them off streaming. Why Netflix? Why? They have a few classics remaining on there still, which are not my personal favorites when it comes to horror classics, but they do have them. They have a few big ones that are very popular. But out of the movies that I love and actually rewatch over and over again, here's what they have. First up, Green Room. Of course I'm going to talk about Green Room. It is a fantastic survival thriller. Some people argue that this is not a horror film and it is just a survival thriller and that's it. I would disagree because it's quite gory for a thriller. I definitely think it crosses over into horror. It's super action-packed. It's going to have you glued to your seat. You're going to be cringing as well, which I guess is what you want if you're watching horror movies. And it has a very menacing and evil Patrick Stewart, so yeah, it's a must-watch. Next up, another movie that needs no introduction, and that is The Silence of the Lambs. I was so happy to see that remaining on the service because it is one of my favorite psychological horror films, also slash thrillers. Very interesting, very dark. Every time I watch it, I remember just how good it is. Not that I forget about that, but it's just one of those films where you think, oh yeah, everybody loves Silence of the Lambs, and then you watch it again and you think, oh, well, of course they do because it's fantastic. So if you haven't seen this one in a while, definitely give it another viewing and enjoy the iconic performances from Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. Then another movie I was so excited to see on Netflix was Pan's Labyrinth. You guys know it's a huge favorite for me. Absolutely in love with this dark, horrific fairy tale. It's Guillermo del Toro's masterpiece. You cannot change my mind on this one because I just think that is the best film that he has made to date, and that is saying something because he has made some really fantastic and unique dark films, but this one is just on the next level, and I do have a review for it as well, giving you 5 reasons why you should watch or rewatch Pan's Labyrinth. Then another film that I just watched recently, I can't believe it took me so long to watch it, but it is Shutter. It's a Thai horror film. It's about a young photographer and his girlfriend who flee the scene of an accident, and then they start seeing mysterious shadows in photographs. It's very creepy and very ghostly, and it gets darker and darker as you get further into it. It does rely on jump scares a little bit too much, but you know, I didn't mind it as much as I normally would, and the ending to this is that was an ending. Finally, the last thing I have to recommend from Netflix is Creep and Creep 2. I'm breaking my own rules. This is technically 2 movies, but I particularly want to recommend the sequel because I think the sequel is better than the original, but both of them are something I enjoy watching and rewatching, and both of them are on Netflix. I'm not going to talk about the plot of the sequel because if you haven't seen the first one, I don't want to ruin anything, but in the first one, a guy responds to an ad on Craigslist, I believe, about this other person looking for a videographer for a day, paying $1,000, which, you know, it's not sketchy at all, right? You can totally trust that. Of course, this being a horror film, he really gets himself into a situation, and it is wonderfully creepy. And something that is surprising to me personally is that both of these are solid found footage horror films. It is not a subgenre I enjoy, but these two are really good. Speaking of found footage horror, I have been on a mission to discover found footage horror films that I actually think are really good. I am not a big found footage film fan, but after watching so many of them, there definitely are some gems out there that more people need to watch. And because of that, I will be making a video about found footage films that do not suck. If you're interested in that, you should make sure you are subscribed to my channel and you have your notifications turned on so you don't miss that video. And if you aren't necessarily interested in that in particular, I think you should still definitely subscribe. I have a ton of reviews and recommendations coming up on my channel. Horror, non-horror, there's a lot that's going to be going on for the rest of the year, so do subscribe. Alright, now for some reason you guys are not big fans of Hulu. In my recent poll that I did, so few of you selected Hulu as their destination for movies. It really made me sad because Hulu has stepped it up and they have a lot of great films available. I'm not just talking about horror, I'm talking about in general, but for horror in particular, here are my picks. First of all, of course, as soon as I saw Let the Right One In is on that service, it was going on my list because, once again, one of my all-time favorite films, not just in the horror genre, but in general. It's fantastic. It's a beautiful story. I talk about this movie all the time, so I'm not going to go on and on about it, but yes, if you want to watch a great vampire film and you haven't seen Let the Right One In, I don't know what you're doing. Get on that. Then another huge favorite of mine, The Cabin in the Woods. You guys know I love those films that kind of are poking fun at the genre, but also are a very effective film within the genre, and Cabin in the Woods is exactly that. It is a Joss Whedon film, so you know that's going to be good. It is funny, it is scary, it is smart, it's clever. It is one of the best horror films of the 2010s. If you don't know why, watch my video on that. But yeah, it is on Hulu, and if you haven't seen it in a while, it is a perfect film to rewatch because the more horror you watch, the more entertaining The Cabin in the Woods gets. Then, one of those movies that used to be on Netflix, actually Let the Right One In was on Netflix until recently as well. See what I mean? What happened, Netflix? But on Hulu, you can find The Devil's Candy. Now, this is one of the most underrated horror films of the past decade. I need people to watch this movie and spread the word because it is so good. It is about a struggling painter who is slowly becoming possessed, and his paintings are kind of manifesting what is going on inside him. There is also a red electric guitar involved that is not just a guitar. There's a guy who's clearly representing the devil. It is a very interesting and a very stylized film. I loved it. I have a review for it if you need more information, but you guys just need to watch it. Then the film that got me into South Korean horror many years ago, the film that started it all, and it is a Bong Joon-ho film. I'm talking about The Host. This is a monster horror film. It is wonderful. For those of you who are fans of Parasite, which I am of course as well, the lead here is also Song Kang-ho, so that is something to look forward to. This film of course has some social commentary. This is Bong Joon-ho we're talking about, and it is just a very entertaining monster horror film. The effects are starting to age a little bit, but that does not take away from the entertainment value. Highly, highly recommend this one. Finally, the last thing I want to recommend that's on Hulu is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now, this is not a horror film, despite having horror in the title. I'm sure a lot of you know that already because it is a very well-known classic, but something about that film just feels so Halloween to me, and I love it. This is another one of those films that I don't think a lot of you realize how much I love this movie and how entertaining I find it. There's dancing, there's singing, there are elaborate costumes, there's weirdness, there's Tim Curry. What else do you need on Halloween? Unexpectedly, Amazon Prime has a ton of great horror and thriller films. I honestly did not realize how big their selection was, but also how many quality films were there. I was having a hard time narrowing this down to just 5, but here we go. First of all, Amazon Prime has Hereditary, and we all know how much I love Hereditary. I will stand by this film and defend it for anybody who says it's not that great. Like, what are you guys even talking about? It's a masterpiece. It is creepy, it is disturbing, it will have you checking dark corners all night instead of sleeping. It has that type of, is something really happening or is it all in their heads plot? And then we do get to find out at the end. It is a wonderful film if you somehow still haven't seen it. But also, they have Midsommar. This is a bonus recommendation. This is not officially on my top 5 list, but if you are an Ari Aster fan and you for some reason do not own Midsommar, you can watch it on Prime. My second favorite here is a huge throwback because it is Fright Night. Not the god-awful remake, but the actual Fright Night from 1985. It is an iconic 80s vampire classic. It has Chris Sarandon as the vampire next door, and he's incredibly enigmatic. But this film is also something that has wonderful practical effects that have been aging pretty well. Some of it is, of course, a little bit cheesy, but in the best 80s way possible. It is actually the film that got me into the whole vampire subgenre, so of course I love it and recommend it. Then, a very underrated film is Lake Mungo. This film, I don't know why people don't talk about it more, but this is an amazing horror mystery. It starts off, you think it's going to be your cheesy, regular found footage horror film. Yes, this is found footage. And it kind of looks like that for a little bit, and then it reveals another layer, and then it takes another turn. And it is a very good horror mystery. I don't want to say anything because once again, this is one of those films that is best to go into knowing as little as you can about it. But yes, it is so worth your time. Please check out Lake Mungo. Then a film that I haven't talked about in a while on my channel, but I do have a very special place in my heart for the Neon Demon. I do have a review for it from a while ago, so don't judge it too harshly, but yes, I am a fan of that film. I know it was very hit or miss for people. It was definitely a hit for me. I loved the build-up. I loved the style of it. I think it is gorgeous. And for a while, it doesn't really seem like a horror film, but eventually it does turn into one, and it is wonderful. It's not perfect, but I still love it, and I think it's very unique and stunning. It's about a young girl who wants to make it as a model in LA, and she finds out how cutthroat and bloodthirsty that business is. For my final Amazon Prime recommendation, I have a double one because I could not pick which one to go with, and that is Clue and Knives Out. Now, once again, these are not horror films. These are more Halloween films that aren't horror, but I'm including them because they feel so cozy and they feel like the Halloween season, and there is a murder mystery involved. I mean, how much more Halloween do you get than the murder mystery? They are both quite similar in concept, even though the plot between the two is obviously very different, but they are both one location mysteries where there's a cast of characters, some more suspicious than others, and there is a murder murder that needs to be solved. And a cozy mystery is just something that I can't imagine my October without. If you're looking for a classic and once again you want to see Tim Curry, then obviously you need to watch or rewatch Clue. And if you're looking for something more fresh and you missed it in theaters, or you didn't miss it and you just want to watch it again, Knives Out, also available on Amazon Prime. Plus, they also have a few of the movies that I mentioned earlier, such as Train to Busan, The Wailing, The Cabin in the Woods. There are others, and there is, as I mentioned, a really big selection on Amazon Prime, so don't miss out on that one. Finally, let's talk about HBO Max, because this is my favorite streaming service at the moment. They may not have as many films overall as Netflix or Amazon Prime, but the quality is great. Almost every film they have on there is really, really good. They have collected some fantastic films. I'm not just talking about horror, but in general, they have a really high quality selection. They have classics, they have new releases, they have nostalgic stuff, they have some of their own HBO originals. It's great. And when it comes to horror, they have two films that are responsible for not only getting me into horror, but also getting me into sci-fi. And of course, I'm talking about Alien and Aliens, and I'm counting this as one pick because, yeah. Alien and Aliens are iconic sci-fi horror. Some people argue that Aliens is more action sci-fi, but I think it's still horror. I mean, that xenomorph is just terrifying. It is incredibly impressive by how well they hold up throughout all these years. Once again, practical effects always working out for the best. And because of those movies, we all know that in space, no one can hear you scream. Also, if you're generally into the franchise, they do have most of the Alien films. They have 3 and 4, and they have Prometheus. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Alien 3 and Alien 4, but I haven't seen them in a very long time, so maybe it is time for a rewatch. Prometheus, I actually do really like, and I'm still pretty annoyed that Covenant didn't really work out for the best. I was hoping they were gonna revitalize the franchise, but the first Alien film and Aliens are on HBO Max, and you should absolutely watch those two. Then another classic that I just watched the other night and was completely blown away by it is Eyes Without a Face. This is a French horror classic from the 60s. There is no reason why it should have still been effective, but it was. The story for this one is a mad scientist situation. I don't want to reveal much because I went in knowing pretty much nothing about it and everything was a surprise, and if you can't have that experience, I absolutely recommend it. It's black and white. It is somehow terrifying and disturbing. I thought I was going to have nightmares after this one. It is 100% still a viable horror film, and you should check it out if you haven't. And since we're on the topic of classics, let's just keep going with that because I have another classic recommendation on my HBO top 5, and that is Jaws. I know so many of you are fans of Jaws. If you don't own this film and you've been wanting to rewatch it, this is your chance. It is once again impressively still effective and still a really good horror film. Once again, one of those films that people argue whether it's horror or not. I side on this is horror and it is presented as a monster movie, so yeah. Plus, I do believe they have a bunch of the sequels on there as well, which I have not seen. Let me know if I should watch the Jaws sequels and what is your favorite one if that exists. I'm assuming none of them are as good as the original, but are they worth watching? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. The last two I want to talk about are more recent horror films, but ones I love dearly. One of them is a horror comedy, Ready or Not. I just talked about this recently in another video. If you remember, I love Samara Weaving, and she is the bride trying to survive the night at her new family super rich people house. It is one of those films that I think people would enjoy whether you love horror or you don't love horror, just because she is a charismatic lead and the whole situation is entertaining. It is more of a survival thriller than a horror film, but it's still definitely a horror film, and it is very, very well done. Last, but certainly not least, The Conjuring 2. Don't know if you guys know, but I am a big fan of The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2. I love these films. There's something about them that really gets to me. I find them really creepy. I wish they had less jump scares, but I will take those because the rest is just so good. Plus, I just love the duo of Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga as Ed and Lorraine Warren. I think they have a fantastic chemistry together and they're just a pleasure to watch on screen. Plus, the situations just creep me the hell out. I love both of them, but unfortunately, the only one that's available on HBO Max is The Conjuring 2. It's not unfortunate because it's not as good as The Conjuring. I think it's just as good as the first film. It's unfortunate because you can't see the first one. But if you haven't seen the first one, then it's totally fine because it is a standalone story and you can absolutely watch The Conjuring 2 without watching the first film. Just be prepared for possessions and creepiness. By the way, sorry I didn't go into a lot of detail about these films. This is 25, well, more than 25 films that I have to talk about today, and I didn't want this video to be an hour long, which it could have been if I started to talk about plot and why I love these movies in more detail. So just take this as my personal recommendations list. The reviews, as I mentioned, are linked in the info box below if I have reviews for these movies, which I think I have reviews for most of these. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you're watching this Halloween season. What are you streaming? Where are you streaming it? If you made it to the end, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. A special thank you to all of my patrons who are supporting me on Patreon, with an extra special thank you to the patrons whose names are on the screen right now. But of course, I love and appreciate every single one of you. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my channel. If you haven't already, follow me on social media, turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you very soon in my next one. Bye!